Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 323, Jewish Fractals. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And before we jump into today's episode, just a reminder that the deadline is coming up to register for our first session of short on yeshiva classes. These are classes that only have 3 sessions each, and they are amazing. They are taught by some of our favorite guests. One is on radically reimagining Jewish practice with Becky Silverstein, the co-founder of the Trans Halacha Project. Another one is on the psychedelic future of Judaism with Zach Kamenetz, who is the founder of Shefa, Jewish Psychedelic Support. And the third one is on looking at the book of Isaiah through a queer perspective with Jericho Vincent, who comes from an ultra-Orthodox background and is now studying for rabbinic ordination through Aleph, the same place that Lex got his ordination. These 3 teachers have been amazing Judaism Unbound guests. You can listen to their episodes, and then you should sign up to take their classes and learn from them directly. We're really excited about it. The deadline to sign up is this coming Sunday, so if you're listening to this on Friday, you only have a few days to sign up, and you should just go to judaismunbound.com/classes, and you'll get all the information you need there. There is generous financial aid available, so if the cost of these classes is prohibitive for you, but you're interested and want to take the classes, please just fill out a financial aid form and hopefully we'll be able to work that out. We are really excited to offer these classes and to have you take them. So please check them out at judaismunbound.com/classes. And now let's get into our episode for this week. Our guest today is Natan Margalit. He is the author of a book that is coming out soon called The Pearl and the Flame, A Journey into Jewish Wisdom, Ecological Thinking, and Healing in a Fragmented World. The book brings a new integration of ecological thinking and core Jewish concepts, which puts Judaism at the forefront of our struggles against current crises such as climate change, the culture of addiction, and social fragmentation. Natan Margalit is the Department Chair of Rabbinic Text and a member of the Aleph Ordination Program Academic VAD. Again, that is the ordination program for Jewish renewal. Natan Margalit was raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, and he has rabbinic ordination from the Jerusalem Seminary and a PhD in Talmud from the University of California at Berkeley. He has taught at Bard College, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and the Rabbinical School of Hebrew College. And he is rabbi, founder, and president of Organic Torah Institute, a nonprofit organization that fosters holistic thinking about Judaism, environment, and society. We should note that Natan Margalit is an important teacher of Lex's from the Aleph Ordination Program. Lex took specific classes with him, but also more profoundly, Natan Margalit is an important teacher of Lex's and now of mine. We're really excited to welcome him to Judaism Unbound today, and just a note that his book is coming out soon. When it does come out, we're going to send an email out to the Judaism Unbound email list so that you can find out how to acquire the book. If you're not already on the Judaism Unbound email list, just go to our website, judaismunbound.com, and sign up for that email list, and you will be notified as soon as the book is available. So without further ado, Natan Margalit, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
It's great to be here, Dan and Lex. I'm looking forward to this.
What was the calling to you that this book needed to be written now? What is it that you're trying to say in the book and accomplish with this book that the world needs to hear?
I really felt the need to write this book because there feels like there's a kind of convergence going on in the world today, where on the one hand, things are falling apart, whether it's climate change and our environment or it's society. A lot of that I felt comes down to the way that we've been taught to think in the last 400 years, mostly by breaking things apart and looking at things in this reductive way of like looking at the world as a machine. When you grab all this power by breaking things down and looking at everything as a machine that you can control and manipulate, lo and behold, it grabs you. And at the same time, it's gotten to a point where we're starting to realize that we actually need to change. And so the modern world has started in the last decades to come around and make this kind of turn towards systems thinking, towards ecology, towards a different way of looking at the world that looks at it as a whole, that looks at the relationships. And that's becoming more and more popular and catching on in so many different fields. And so I really had this passion of feeling like there is a whole way of thinking that we find in Judaism, we find in Jewish texts, we find in Jewish practice, that's about bringing things together and looking at things as a whole, looking at relationships. And in this time in history, there's also a modern scientific language, which I call ecological thinking or systems thinking. And Judaism in modernity has been kind of like this sort of trying to fit a round peg into a square hole kind of thing. Like we've tried to fit Judaism into this sort of Western modern way of thinking, and it's all nice and mechanical and individualistic and all of those kinds of things, and we end up cutting off all of the bodily and earthly and all of those kinds of things that don't fit into that idea of nice clean modernity. And so rather than that kind of Judaism that feels like it's just sort of like trying to squeeze into something, we can actually find a real modern language that really fits this way of thinking about wholeness. People are starting to pay attention to this mode of thought.
So there was a story that you told in the book, and then we had a little bit of conversation before we started recording, where you told the story of your first son's bar mitzvah and really his bar mitzvah speech or his Torah interpretation. And it turned out that both of your sons had the Torah portion that includes the Binding of Isaac story. And I was really fascinated by not only the story of what he said about it, but also that you wrote about it with pride. And I say all that because I want to get out here sort of what kind of rabbi you are. So could you tell us a little bit about that story of your sons and what they said at their bar mitzvahs?
Sure. Thank you, Dan. I am really proud of of our kids and the way they are growing as individuals, very different from one another, and often different from what the kind of the mold that our communities sometimes try to put people in. But my older son had a bar mitzvah that kind of went down into the history books of our shul, where he was talking about the binding of Isaac, and he started out with, he was learning with me. I was learning with him, so it wasn't a surprise to me at all. But so he had the basic idea that Abraham really should have just refused God, that this Abraham was wrong to follow God, and that was, and I thought that was a reasonable thing, but I wanted him to develop it more and connect it to his life. And so he ended up saying in his bar mitzvah speech the way that he thought that we as his parents had been kind of like Abraham in sort of sending him to Jewish day school because we're so religious and believe in God and Judaism, and him, as he said, him, not so much. But so that was kind of like his binding on the, on the altar. And finally we heard the angels, and when he was in sixth grade, and took him out, and now he's more happily in public school. The people, to the credit of our rabbis and the shul community, we were all just proud of him for saying his truth. And I think that it is a model of how we can have communities that are strong communities and support people's individual searches and their individual ways of understanding. And we can bring that into community, because that's a healthy community is able to find each person's individuality and see where that fits in and support that. And our younger son also just kind of went down in the history books as well, because he did, I think it was the first rock and roll electric guitar riffing that we've had in our shul history. he connected. He also had the binding of Isaac, as it turned out, for his parsha.
Which is an amazing thing for one father to have two sons, have the binding of Isaac story of Abraham putting Isaac on the altar. I feel like this is some kind of divine torture mechanism that you've for some reason been put through. But I'm not saying you deserve that, but it's like fascinating to me.
Same for Abraham. I mean, what did he do?
I know, exactly. Well, so that was not lost on me. And I thought about that, how they both had this story of their father putting him on the altar. But my younger son, who's very deeply into rock and roll and knows more about the history of rock and roll and music and all the different styles and genres than I'll ever know. But he connected the binding of Isaac to this aspect that we needed as a religion. We needed to kind of cut the crap and get out of our conventional niceness and go to the things that are really going to grab people, which are these life and death situations. And he brought all these examples from rock and roll. He talked about Motley Crue and Nikki Sixx lighting himself on fire and all of those kind of things where you see and the protest songs that you find in rock and roll, where it's about, we're not going to be polite. There's things we have to say, and we're going to grab your attention by getting to the elemental truths that it's about life and death. And he connected that beautifully to the binding of Isaac. And so it was really, I felt like I was able to support both of our sons in finding their real particular takes on Judaism and on this story. And to the credit of our community, they were really embraced in in their individual path. And there was no cookie cutter bar bat mitzvahs. It was really their expression. So to me, it's a really wonderful expression of what we mean by emergence and how communities can really be healthy, because it doesn't nullify the individual to say that we value community.
So people can't see me who are listening to the podcast, but like I'm nodding my head very vigorously as you talk about things like systems thinking. And a lot of the reason I'm nodding my head vigorously is because I read your book, which helped break down what that means. Like I think largely because of all the things you described, like largely because we inhabit the society that hasn't been thinking in terms of systems and relationships and has been breaking things down to individual parts and sort of spliced selves separate from others. Like it's very hard to understand what that framing of systems thinking means. And so I'd love for you to just give us a really sort of bit by bit. I know, I apologize that that's reductionist. It's reduced to parts, bits. Like, give us a little bit of a step-by-step intro into what you mean when you talk about systems thinking and the ways it connects to Judaism.
My approach to systems thinking, I explained through what I call the three mems. That is the three Hebrew words which start with the letter mem. And those three mems correspond to three core principles in systems thinking. That first word that starts with the Hebrew letter mem is minyan. Minyan corresponds to emergence. So a minyan is this idea in Judaism that if you have 10 adult Jews there, then there is no longer just a group of individuals, but you have community. So all of a sudden, there's something which is the whole, which is greater than the sum of the parts. That is the basic idea of emergence. And emergence is a whole field unto itself that many people are looking at, of how emergence works in entrepreneurship, how it works in biology, how it looks in medicine, all sorts of things. But it really is this shift to look at not just the parts, but look at the whole picture. So, for example, that story of the cats over Borneo, where the Western approach when there was this outbreak of malaria was, let's go in and spray DDT. That's looking at one factor, and we have one factor that's going to, in a linear kind of way, solve that problem. And of course, they go in and they spray the DDT. And so it gets into the whole ecosystem, and it gets in, and the insects and the geckos are consuming the DDT. And then the cats are eating the geckos. And then the cats are dying. And so there's an outbreak of rats. And the rats are bringing typhus and all sorts of other worse diseases than they had before. And so the World Health Organization has to come and get the British Royal Air Force to find 14,000 cats from the streets of London and parachute them in to take care of this problem that they themselves created, because they were not looking at the whole picture. They were looking at just one small factor.
So that's an incredible window into the first mem. I'm eager for you to share the second and third mem words for our listeners. What comes after Minyan?
So after Minyan is Mikdash, which is Hebrew word for sanctuary. And that I connect to the systems principle of nestedness, or it's actually very similar to what we talk about as fractals. That is to say, there are things in nature are nested, the way you have mitochondria within a cell, and a cell within an organ within a body, and a body within a community, and all the way up and all the way down from the largest to the smallest. Why do I say that Mikdash sanctuary? Is that because you find that in Judaism, first back in the ancient temple, you had the Holy of Holies, and the Holy of Holies was in a holy area, and that was in one courtyard, and that was in a larger courtyard, and that was in the walls, which was in the city. And so you find that it's not that there's holiness here and not there. We have this in modern Judaism as well. We have the sense of the individual is holy. As we sing in that song, a lot of people now are saying, "Oh Lord, prepare me to make me a sanctuary." We understand that the individual person in our bodies is a sanctuary, but we're also part of a sanctuary when we come and we join in community. And we might go into the actual sanctuary of a synagogue. And you can be a person whose soul is connected to the individual, a person whose soul is connected to the nation, somebody who's connected to all humanity, and then someone who's connected to all of creation. And really, the deepest song is when all four of those are singing together in harmony. We don't have to have this either or between particular and universal. We don't have to choose between, I'm going to put all my energy into Judaism and I'll have to diss the rest of the world. No, or I have to choose, I'm going to be universal, and therefore I'm not going to pay attention to the fact that I'm Jewish. The two can go together very easily. And the same with community, that I don't have to give up my individuality. In fact, the only way I can really actually express my individuality is in the context of some kind of community.
I'd love to hear the third mem, the third mem of systems thinking, and also sort of carrying forward a part of the second mem of Mikdash and of that fractal idea. This is one of our monthly Shemitah episodes, one of our monthly episodes where we're connecting to this year of release. And one theme of Shemitah that we've, I think, been realizing over the course of this, it's not like when you ask people what Shemitah is about, there's many different things to say, but they tend to say the earth or relieving debts, the various commandments of Shemitah. What a few of our guests have said, and they've influenced me on this, is they've emphasized sort of the structural component of Shemitah, where it is part of this fractal setup, similar to that nestedness idea that you were saying, where Shabbat is sort of one unit of the fractal, 7 days, and then you can zoom out to the next unit, which maybe you could go to 7 weeks of the Omer period of the year before Shavuot. You could zoom out to the Shemitah next 7-year period, and then you could zoom out even more to the Jubilee period. And so there's this 7 and 7s and 7s and 7s, similar to what you were describing with an individual in a community, in a nation, in a world, in humanity, in all creation. And so basically I'd love first the third mem, because I know our listeners are itching for that third piece, but then help us connect this to ideas of Shemitah.
Yeah. So thank you, Lex. The third mem is mitzvah. Mitzvah is a small action that might have a large effect. I say it might because you never know. And that's key because that's connected. I connect mitzvah to this idea of what they call bifurcation events, or in more sort of popular language, tipping points, that a small action can have a huge effect. It's kind of like that sort of theoretical butterfly effect of a butterfly in China flaps its wing and it caused a hurricane in Kansas. But small actions, if we look at our lives, small actions can often have huge effect. And so coming back to Shemitah, the idea of nestedness or fractals, it works in space, it works in time, and it works in people. So in time, as you talked about, Lex, you have the 7-day week, the Shabbat, which is the rhythm of the week. You have the 7 weeks of Shavuot. There's also the 7 months. If we start our holiday cycle, the summer holiday cycle of biblical holidays goes from Passover till the end of Sukkot. And that's a 7-month cycle. Then we have the 7 years. And you have 7 days of Shiva at a death. And you have 7 days of Sheva Brachot for a traditional marriage. So you've got one of the things that I think is really important about Shemitah is that it puts rhythm back into our lives. We as living beings need rhythm. We need times of activity and times of rest. We need times of being together and times of being alone. We need all of these different rhythms, and they work together to create patterns in our lives. And it brings beauty into our life when we can have that sense of a pattern. And the pattern of Shemitah is really amazing, because especially the way Rav Kook understood it as really it's a path towards the messianic kind of goal of being in total harmony. And so if you were to really do Shemitah, if you really did Shabbat, and then you did, that was on the sort of individual level every 7 days, and then your whole society were to actually let go and recognize, one of the keys to Shemitah is recognizing that we are not the owners, that we live in this illusion that we could own property on the earth, that we could, in fact, Shemitah tells us that's a very nice illusion that we're going to let you have for 6 years. But 7th year, we're going to remind you of the reality is that you're not owners. And then we do that 7 times and build each time, building a little more consciousness until you get to Yovel, to the Jubilee, which I don't know if ever really happened in history. But if we could ever get to 7 in a row and we get to the Jubilee is essentially a messianic consciousness. Nobody's subjected to one another. The rich and the poor become equalized. It is an iterative way of moving forward. It says we can't move forward in one fell swoop. We need to actually put into our lives these rhythms that give a shape and a pattern to move us forward. And so that's part of how I see Shemitah.
So first off, we have made an early plug on this podcast in the past that I'll reiterate now, which is that I think that we should say the next Jubilee year, which is to say maybe the first Jubilee year for the reasons you just argued, should be 2049/50. That is another Shemitah year, and it coincides with the numbers 49 and 50, which are debated by biblical scholars which one should apply to the Jubilee year. So we'd be blurring the Gregorian calendar and the Jewish calendar in that sense. And so just everybody mark your calendars for 27 years from now. It's going to be banging. We're going to celebrate a lot. There's going to be music. There's going to be rallies. It's going to be justice driven. It's going to be so good.
And I think that'll be just a good time for retirement for me. And then, somebody else will take over this podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Good to start succession planning a little early. So that aside, I've spent so much of my life thinking about the number 7, and you just unlocked something deep in me when you brought up that month, that 7-month period. To name that all of the biblical holidays are between the Bible's first month and the Bible's 7th month. I say the Bible's because, we label the months differently now. And the 7th month is now the first month, and the first month is now the 7th month. It's this very topsy-turvy thing, but suffice to say, in the Bible, all of the biblical holidays are within 7 months, and then there's 5 with no holidays. That's actually fascinating to me, and I hadn't thought about that before. It's almost as if there's an implicit teaching where within each year you should sort of have a Shemitah. You should have a time of rest. Like, you've got your 3 big pilgrimage festivals, you've got a couple other big holidays in that 7-month period, and then chill. Everybody chill. Take a sec, take a breather, a 5-month breather, almost half the year, and then you'll start to be ready when the next round of Passover and then the remainder come up. And of course there's also Rosh Chodesh. There's monthly holidays, but in the grand sense of annual holidays, they're all in that 7-month period. So that's something I had never thought about before, but it actually gives me a new lens on Shemitah because of the nestedness idea that you said. It gives me a lens that not only is Shemitah sort of connected to Shabbat in the way that Shabbat is to the rest of the week, as the Shemitah year is to the other 6 years. It's actually maybe parallel to this 5-month period in the Bible. Now, we've actually discarded that period now, right? Like we have holidays. We have Hanukkah, we have Purim, we have other holidays that are now around in that time period. And so it doesn't really function in that same way. But I guess I was curious to hear from you, like, are there other ways, are there other ideas of Shemitah that you draw from systems thinking, or other ideas of systems thinking that you find grounding for in Shemitah that are powerful for you?
Well, first of all, I just want to come back to what you're saying about the months, because it really is actually very deep what's going on with the summer months versus the winter months. That, there's that change of where you say, you ask in the prayers, you ask for rain during the summer, and you ask in the winter, you ask for dew. So what's the difference between rain and dew? And we have those rabbinic holidays. You have Hanukkah and Purim, which have a different message. It's more of a message of hiddenness. They're a message of God acting in a more hidden way, and human initiative coming forward in a different way. One of the real sort of basic things that I want to get across in the book is this idea that we are most healthy and alive and joyful when we are feeling ourselves part of a larger whole. And so one of the things that Shemitah really does is it forces us to get out of our sense of ownership and privatization. What we have because it came as a gift to us. And so we need to share it. Breaking down that sense that I have this, I have ownership, and you don't. So that sense of wholeness is really something that I think we thirst for. Can we start to come out of our privatized spaces and open up to something that we yearn for, and yet we've built a society that doesn't support that as much as it could.
I'm actually reflecting back on the stories of your son's bar mitzvahs and your reaction to them, because I'm thinking about, and you write about Thomas Kuhn, who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions in your book. And, as I understand Kuhn or think about that, it's basically the idea that in science, and then we can analogize that to all kinds of other areas, there's this particular way of thinking that dominates for a long time, and then something comes out from the periphery and kind of almost like smashes into that old way that we've been doing things. And ultimately, if it works, there's some kind of synthesis that comes out of that where, we go off on a new path. I think of it a little bit as like when when you're playing pool and, you hit the ball from the side and then it goes off in a straight line, but in a different direction, and there's, and that's actually, there is a continuity there, but it's a different kind of continuity than something that's just continuing in the same direction. And in all of these paradigms, at least when we're looking at them analytically in the rearview mirror with the help of scholars and academics, we see these as good things. That this is a great thing that happened, and the organism would have died if it hadn't taken this turn. But in Judaism, and I think also often some of us feel this way in a family, you have some notion that it's supposed to be continuous the way that it has been. You have a vision for what your child is going to do. You hope that your child will carry on your legacy. And I'm curious about how you reflect on that more generally, but I'm also thinking about how Lex and I have recently been talking with some folks about the subject of conversions and people coming to Judaism. And you mentioned that briefly a few minutes ago. I think you alluded to it, that, maybe the future of Judaism is going to be because of the contributions of people who are not born Jewish. That's the way that it has been throughout history. And yet there's this element of judgmentalism, or, it's good that people are converting, but they should kind of just be part of what we do here, and not be like trying to push it in a different direction, all of which are ideas that Lex and I are constantly fighting against. And yet I wonder if it can be folded into this whole sort of theoretical paradigm that you're laying out.
That really relates to, especially to this idea, going back to the book of Ruth, of the messianic line that, that Ruth, who is the progenitor of King David, who is the classic, sort of founder of the line of the Messiah, is that redemption comes when you bring in the stranger. The redemption comes when you are allowing that person who is not part of the society to come and make a contribution. In some ways, that's what that book of Ruth is about. And we have the holiday of Purim, which is all about wearing these masks and, consume as much wine so that you don't know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. And what does that mean? It means that there's a value in breaking down those rules. For as much as we say we value those rules, we also need to remind ourselves that they're not the deepest reality, that all of those boundaries and rules point to a deeper oneness, that there's a unity. It's like, it comes back to the Shema. We say the Shema all the time. The Shema says, remember, God is one. Remember that, there are no boundaries, but how do we remember that? We start with these fractal liminal joints, first in your heart, then on the surface of your body with your hand and your eyes, then on the doorposts of your house, then the doorposts, then on your gates, then when you're walking on the road, and then the fractals of time. Tell it to your children, the next generation, going when you're lying down and when you're rising up. So we acknowledge on all of these points of difference, those points of transition, the liminal transition places. Those are ways that we have to acknowledge all of those differences in order to bring ourselves to a oneness. It's a real interesting kind of paradox. And so one day a year, Purim, there are no rules. We're beyond all the rules. And that reminds us that when we come back to all the rules, that the rules are not ultimate, that we actually need to hold them lightly. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck in our same old ways of thinking, and we're never going to get that renewal that's going to keep things alive and healthy.
I have a question that's a bit of a gear shift, but it's kind of connected also to some of what Dan was referencing around like communal fears around Judaism changing too quickly or families changing too quickly, etc. And unsmooth segue. You're from Hawaii. You grew up in Hawaii. I forget if you lead with that in your book or if it comes up relatively early, but it's prominent in your book. And I think that it's an important thing to elevate and lift up because your story is actually really powerful as it relates to this conversation. Your parents, you talk about as being, from New York and not connecting particularly to Judaism and Jewishness. And they go to Hawaii. And I think like the communal image of that is like, that family is gone from Judaism. The way we talk about how Jewishness is passed from generation to generation or whatever, like, I think the image in people's mind is like, well, growing up in New York, that's likely to lead to like a Jewish life. Hawaii, like that's not where Jews, I don't know how many synagogues are in Hawaii, maybe one or two, like not a lot. And certainly it would be harder. Here you are, a rabbi and a teacher of rabbis. So something about that thesis isn't standing up. It also resonates with me, but my parents are both from New York, although less distant from their Jewishness potentially in some ways. But like I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is, a Protestant Lutheran paradise, not so much a Jewish paradise in some communal senses. And I also think that if I had grown up in a different context with more Jews around, I actually would potentially be less interested in Judaism. There's actually a way in which having a period early on where I was not so deep into Jewish life, it made it fresh and exciting to me at a later age. Not that late age for me, as like a teenager or high schooler. But like that connects to the conversion piece, because what folks who convert bring is an energy and excitement because by definition, they have chosen this. And I don't know about you, like I always liked the group projects in school where we got to choose who was in the group with us. People who convert have in effect chosen the group. They've chosen to join the group project. And I like, whether it's on the podcast, whether that's in other countries, I like learning from those people and even having those people steer the ship of what Judaism is and will be. So a lot of things there, but like, tell us things we don't understand about Judaism that we would better understand if we grew up in Hawaii, maybe. And also, like, how might this sort of Jewish communal anxiety around converts, et cetera, how might it tie to some of the experiences that were different for you? You were Jewish by birth, but like, how might it tie to your own journey of Jewish experience?
When I think about that, I agree with that experience, because not having grown up with that sort of like community around me, with so many people that I've met have sort of like been jaded, and they say, oh, I know this is, and it becomes like that kind of jaded. I didn't have any of that jadedness. And for me, when I first encountered Jewish community, it was kind of like an ugly duckling story. It was sort of like there was some part of me that was Jewish in terms of like something that I had, that had been communicated to me somehow through my parents and our home culture. But I was trying to live in Hawaii and fit in Hawaii, and feeling a little bit like the ugly duckling, where I was doing it and I was surfing and I was playing ball and I was speaking pidgin English and I was doing all the things that one does in Hawaii to fit in. And yet there was a part of me that wasn't being answered. And so when I went as a teenager to Camp Swig, which was the first time I was really in a immersive Jewish space, it was like, oh, I'm a Jew. There was a part of me that appreciated it in a way that I would not have appreciated it had I sort of been immersed in it from the beginning. And and there are ways that being in Hawaii really gave me a different angle on things. That I talk about that banyan tree that I grew up, the banyan trees that were around our house, and just the experience of that sensuous nature that one has in Hawaii, and the connectedness to the land which is almost exactly opposite side of the earth from Israel, but a deep connection to the land one has in Hawaii. The beauty, which is almost undescribable, how one just walks out your door and you're an incredible beauty. So that got into my soul as well. And so there was a kind of a new combination. There was kind of an alchemy that happened, I think, when I was able to connect all of those parts of myself, the Hawaiian part and the Jewish part, and they started to come together. So, yeah, and it does relate to the value of welcoming people in, people who are joining and choosing to join the Jewish tribe, and also bringing things in that are going to enliven us. We're in, again, a place where our boundaries are shifting. And when you have permeable boundaries, then each generation is going to find the right balance between where, how hard do those boundaries need to be and how open do they need to be? It's always going to be a different balance. And we're finding in our generations a different kind of balance.
First of all, I want to say that it's hard for me to relate to somebody who grew up in Hawaii and then left. I don't understand that. I have like a life dream to go and move there, which my more practical
wife... He made
wife...
Yerida. He descended from the elevated sacred place. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Seriously. Well, I'm grateful to you for coming because for coming to us, because my more practical wife, I don't think is going to allow this dream to come to be. But
it is the name of God spelled backwards.
Whoa!
That is amazing.
Just blew my and thousands of listeners' minds. Yeah. That's amazing.
Maybe that should be the title of this episode. Hawaii is God spelled backwards. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit was thinking back and thinking forward, because as you were talking earlier about that we're in this time of the machine falling apart, or and the solution, we've either always had the solution in a certain way, or maybe the solution is emerging just as the problem is emerging in its most extreme sense. All of those things were reminding me of these critical times in Jewish history, like 586 BCE, or the Babylonian exile, or the 1st and 2nd century CE, when the Second Temple was destroyed and the rabbis were reimagining Judaism. That is a statement that would be true for those times, that they were both the times of like these tremendous destructions and fallings apart, and it wasn't just because of the more powerful army, and that these things were already falling apart, and yet also their solutions were emerging. And maybe, I'm curious, like, how you think about how those are tied in. Is it just like that happens to be, and if you're not lucky enough that your thing falls apart at exactly the time that your solution emerges, then you're screwed and it's over? Or is it like, no, actually, it always happens that when it's falling apart, the solution is also being revealed? We could talk about all that, and I'd love for you to, but also I'm wondering, like, if we think of ourselves as living in a time like that, then I guess I'm hoping for you to play out a little bit that the implications of what might arise if we were to take systems theory, your approach, and apply it to our time. What can we sort of start to envision, or at least dream about, an alternative future that would be so exciting, and maybe people wouldn't have to be so scared from the falling apart if they had something to look at that would be an exciting dream? The last thing I'll say is that I've struggled with the story of the scouts in the book of Numbers, in a certain sense that I feel like that story is very complex and there's all kinds of issues that go on. But I feel like one of the issues is that the scouts don't come back with a very inspiring vision. They say it's a land flowing with milk and honey, but we already knew that because that's exactly what God said to Moses on Mount Sinai. So the scouts kind of contribute nothing except the scary stuff. And so it's no surprise that the people are scared. So I'm wondering if we can take the stuff that you're talking about and almost paint a little bit of a picture to say, well, this is what it could look like if it really worked out.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, I really like the way that you're saying that this is not the first paradigm shift, that in Judaism, we've had all of these various paradigm shifts. It's one of the reasons that I love to study the Mishnah and teach the Mishnah, as Lex knows, because that was a time of
proud student here.
Paradigm shift. And we can see if we open up the Mishnah and look at it, if we look at it with eyes that are looking for the deeper patterns and not just the surface, but we go beneath the beneath the words or in between the lines to see the relationships, we can see that they were grappling with all those deep questions. And one of the things that they did, which I think is really important for us to remember, is that you go back and you really understand what the previous paradigm was. Like you really go back and you gather all of the pieces and you don't throw them out, but you put them together again in a new way. It's why I really believe that we need to study our tradition and study it not putting it on a pedestal of like, this is the way it has to be, but studying it to say, what are the gems in there? What are the pearls that we can string? And so that we know what it is, and then we can string it in a new way, and we can put it together in a way that really fits for us. And I feel like we've got a lot of examples that are inspiring. When we look around, we're starting to see new ideas of community, and we look at different cultures that are not so caught up in this sort of modern hyper-individualist way of looking at the world. And we're starting to be inspired by different ways of living. And then we connect that to Judaism, and we say, hey, you know what? This is not far into Judaism. Judaism actually also has a lot of these same kind of relational ways of looking at the world, pattern ways, looking at the whole. And so I really feel that there's a lot of place for inspiration, that when we think about it, it's not about giving something up, whether we're talking about having a rich Jewish life, or we're talking about saving the planet and doing things so that we're not bringing on climate destruction. Like I love composting, and I love baking challah, and I love when I bake the challah, before I do the final braiding, I take that little piece out. I take the challah, and it's that little bit, and it's for me a very meaningful time of reflection as I take that piece out. It's one of the few things I think we have in Judaism today, which is like a sacrifice. It's a little bit of a tiny bit of dough but I'm saying, I'm bringing this out, and I'm not going to eat this because I'm remembering everything that went into this dough. And I'm appreciating the earth and the people and all of the different factors that came in. And then I put it in the compost, because the compost is where it can really go back into the whole. And when I put stuff in the compost, I say a bracha of Michaye Hametim, of who resurrects the dead. Because for me, composting is a way that we can, in a very literal way, participate in that resurrecting the dead. It's not some sci-fi fantasy thing. It's these molecules can be transformed from something decay and rotten, which our society might define as waste, and we're transforming that into new life. When I feel that, when I'm now making the challah, or I'm preparing a meal using the vegetables from our garden, I feel that life, and I feel that joy of being part of this pattern and part of that cycle. So it's not giving up something. It's actually creating a Judaism that feels really alive and really, really fun to be part of those cycles.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll add mahalo for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we're definitely going to be sitting with so many principles from it for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lex, and thank you, Dan. This has been fun. It's been great talking with you.
And a thank you and a mahalo to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. We want to close out this episode in the same way that we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us. But before we do, we want to super duper strongly encourage you to get The Pearl and the Flame, Natan Margalit's book. And you can't just yet, as we record this, order it, but we absolutely will be emailing out our email list with information about how you can get The Pearl and the Flame in the very near future. So get on our email list at judaismunbound.com if you're not yet, and if you're already on the list, then just stay tuned. And also just, Google The Pearl and the Flame here and there if you're looking to see if it's available yet, because it will be soon. But we definitely encourage you to get that book. And We also love it when you are in touch with us. So here are all the different ways that you can do that. First, you can head to our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, you can go to our website, JudaismUnbound.com. And third, you can email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. The last request we like to make is that we deeply appreciate any amount of financial donation that you're able to send our way. And you can do that on either a monthly recurring basis or just as a one-time gift via JudaismUnbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.